Hey everybody. Today we will begin an interesting discussion on history. I am ready. Everyone says they are broke. Inflation is crushing household budgets. Real wages have stagnated for decades. Credit card debt in the United States alone has crossed $1 trillion for the first time in history. Rent is consuming a larger percentage of income than at any point in the last 50 years. And yet, global luxury goods. Sales hit record highs in 2023. International air travel rebounded faster than any economist predicted after the pandemic. Restaurant spending remains elevated. Vacation bookings are at historic peaks. How do you reconcile those two realities? How does a population that describes itself as financially stressed simultaneously sustain a luxury economy that has never been larger? The answer is not that people are irrational. The answer is not that they lack discipline. The answer is that their spending behavior is being shaped by a psychological mechanism that most of them have never heard of, a mechanism that central banks and financial institutions have understood, studied, and deliberately activated for decades. It is called the wealth effect, and once you understand how it works, you will never look at your own financial decisions the same way again. Part 1: The Anomaly. Feeling rich vs. being wealthier is a distinction that the financial system works very hard to keep blurry in your mind. The distinction between feeling wealthy and being wealthy, they are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing. But for most people, most of the time, they feel identical, and that feeling is the mechanism. Here is how it works. Imagine you bought a house 10 years ago for $300,000. Today, according to Zillow, that house is worth $600,000. Your net worth on paper has increased by $300,000. You feel wealthier, significantly wealthier. That feeling is real. The psychological experience of seeing that number is indistinguishable from the psychological experience of having $300,000 in your bank account. But here's what actually changed. You still live in the same house. You cannot spend the appreciation without selling the house and moving somewhere cheaper, which, in most markets, means the appreciation is largely offset by the increased cost of your next home. The number went up. Your actual purchasing power, your ability to acquire goods and services, changed very little. The wealth was paper wealth, unrealized, theoretical. A number on a screen that reflects what someone might hypothetically pay for your home if you sold it today under current conditions. Now here's where the mechanism activates. Because you feel wealthier, you spend differently. Research in behavioral economics consistently demonstrates that people adjust their consumption upward when they perceive their net worth to have increased, even when that increase is entirely unrealized. They eat at better restaurants. They take more expensive vacations. They upgrade their car. They renovate their kitchen, and critically, they borrow more. Because someone who feels wealthy feels confident. Someone who feels confident feels comfortable taking on debt. Someone comfortable with debt is exactly what the financial system requires to function at the scale it currently operates. The house didn't make you rich, but it made you feel rich, and that feeling changed your behavior in ways that were enormously profitable for everyone except you. This is the wealth effect, and it was not discovered by accident. Part 2: The policy of mind control, how central banks weaponized psychology in 1996. Alan Greenspan, then chairman of the United States Federal Reserve, the most powerful monetary policymaker on earth, stood before Congress and delivered testimony that contained a phrase most people heard but few understood. He spoke about the wealth effect as a driver of consumer spending and economic growth. He was not describing a natural phenomenon. He was describing a policy tool. Greenspan understood something that the economics textbooks of that era were only beginning to formalize: consumer spending, which drives approximately 70% of the American economy. And similar percentages in most developed economies is not driven purely by income. It is driven by perceived wealth. When people feel wealthier, they spend more. When they spend more, the economy grows. When the economy grows, the political environment is stable, credit markets function, and the financial system expands. The logical implication of this understanding is extraordinary. If you can make people feel wealthier without actually making them wealthier, if you can engineer the psychological experience of wealth without delivering its substance, you can drive consumer spending, economic growth, and financial system expansion without raising wages, without redistributing income, without any of the politically difficult interventions that actually increasing living standards requires. This is precisely what monetary policy in the 1990s and accelerating through the 2000s and beyond was designed to do. When the Federal Reserve cuts interest rates, the immediate effect is to make borrowing cheaper. But the secondary effect, the effect that Greenspan and his successors understood and valued, is asset price inflation. Lower interest rates push investors out of low-yielding safe assets and into stocks, real estate, and other appreciating assets. Asset prices rise. People who own those assets feel wealthier. They spend more. The economy grows. The Federal Reserve did not stumble accidentally upon this mechanism. Internal Fed documents, academic papers published by Fed economists, and the public testimony of Fed officials across multiple decades make clear that the wealth effect was an understood, analyzed, and deliberately activated component of monetary policy. In 2010, then Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post explicitly defending the second round of quantitative easing, the Fed's bond buying program, by citing the wealth effect. He wrote that higher stock prices would boost consumer wealth and help increase confidence, which could also spur spending. This is a sitting central bank chairman publicly explaining that his policy was designed to make people feel wealthy enough to spend money they did not technically have. The policy worked. Between 2009 and 2020, the S&P 500 increased by approximately 400%. American household net worth, on paper, increased by tens of trillions of dollars. Consumer spending remained elevated. The economy grew, and wages. Adjusted for inflation, median real wages in the United States grew by approximately 6% over the same decade that stock prices grew by 400%. The feeling of wealth was manufactured at scale. The substance of wealth, the actual purchasing power of actual wages, barely moved. That is not a coincidence. That is the architecture. Part 3 Cui bono. WHO actually profits follow the mechanism to its logical endpoint and asks the question that always clarifies a financial system. Who benefits? When the middle class feels wealthy and increases its spending often by borrowing against the paper appreciation of its assets, a chain of value transfer begins that is worth tracing carefully. The middle class homeowner who feels wealthy takes out a home equity line of credit to renovate their kitchen. That loan is originated by a bank. The bank charges interest. The homeowner agrees to repay the principal plus interest over years or decades. The future labor of the homeowner, hours of work not yet performed, is legally committed to the bank in advance. This is what debt actually is. It is a legal claim on your future. When you take on debt, you are selling a portion of your future earnings to a financial institution in exchange for purchasing power today. The institution profits from the spread between what it costs them to source that capital and what they charge you to borrow it, when asset prices are artificially elevated by monetary policy, and that elevation makes you feel wealthy enough to borrow. You are being invited to trade your future labor for a present feeling of prosperity. The renovation happens. The kitchen looks beautiful. The bank holds a legal claim on years of your future income. Extend this across an entire economy, tens of millions of households, each feeling wealthier than their actual income would justify, each borrowing against paper appreciation, each legally committing future labor to financial institutions. The aggregate effect is an enormous sustained transfer of future productive capacity from the working and middle class to the financial sector. This transfer is not accomplished through taxation, which requires political authorization and public debate. It is accomplished through psychology, through the deliberate engineering of a feeling that causes people to voluntarily enter legal arrangements that systematically benefit their counterparties more than themselves. The luxury goods industry benefits because the wealth effect drives spending above what income alone would support. The travel industry benefits for the same reason. Retailers, restaurant chains, and consumer goods companies all benefit from a consumer base that feels wealthier than its wages would suggest. But the deepest and most durable benefit flows to the financial sector. Because when the feeling of wealth fades, when asset prices correct, when the paper appreciation reverses, the debt remains. The legal claims on future labor do not disappear when the stock market falls or housing prices decline. The wealth was an illusion. The debt is real. In 2008, American housing prices fell sharply. Millions of households discovered that their primary store of wealth, the home they had borrowed against, whose paper appreciation had made them feel prosperous for a decade, was worth less than the debt secured against it. The feeling evaporated. The debt remained. The banks that had originated those loans received government bailouts. The homeowners who had borrowed against the feeling of wealth faced foreclosure, bankruptcy, and years of financial reconstruction. The asymmetry in that outcome is not accidental. It reflects the legal architecture of the system accurately. In a crisis, the institution holding the legal claim on your future labor is protected. You absorb the loss on the asset whose artificial appreciation prompted you to make the commitment in the first place. The climax, the greatest trick the financial system ever pulled was not hiding its mechanisms from you. Its greatest trick was making you finance your own participation in it with enthusiasm. You bought the house because real estate always goes up. You borrowed against it because you felt wealthy. You spent the borrowed money on goods and services that sustained an economy whose growth was measured and celebrated. You felt like a participant in prosperity, and in a narrow sense you were. The feeling was real. The kitchen renovation happened. The vacation was taken. The experiences were genuine, but the structural reality underneath those experiences was a systematic transfer of your future labor, your financial flexibility, your capacity to weather adversity toward institutions whose entire purpose is to hold legal claims on exactly those things. The wealth effect was not invented to impoverish the middle class. It was activated because it works. It drives spending. It sustains growth. It maintains the political stability that financial systems require to function. But it works by exploiting a fundamental feature of human psychology, the inability to clearly distinguish between feeling wealthy and being wealthy, and deploying that exploit at civilizational scale through monetary policy. Understanding that mechanism does not immediately change your circumstances. The system is too large and too structurally embedded for individual awareness to alter its operation. But awareness changes how you interpret your own impulses. The next time you feel inexplicably wealthy after watching your investment account balance climb, awareness asks whether that feeling reflects a change in your actual purchasing power or a change in a number on a screen. The next time you feel comfortable enough to take on significant debt, awareness asks who benefits from that comfort and what you are actually trading. These are not comfortable questions. The system is not designed to encourage them. But they are the questions that separate people who understand the architecture they are operating inside from people who simply feel its effects without comprehending their source. Central banks openly discuss the wealth effect in their policy papers and public communications. The academic literature on its mechanisms fills libraries. The deliberate activation of this psychological phenomenon as a tool of monetary policy is documented, public, and entirely legal. What is not widely distributed is the full picture of who benefits from the mechanism and who absorbs its costs when the feeling inevitably fades. Now you have that picture. The feeling of wealth is not always evidence of wealth. Sometimes it is evidence that the system is working exactly as designed. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe to Economic Chronicles, the hidden architecture of money and power. We show you where to look.